afternoon readers, it's Tilly here from Tilly's Shelf, and today I'm going to be reviewing some gardening books. So my other main hobby apart from reading is gardening, and in case you're wondering, my garden has been as neglected as my booktube channel over recent years. I haven't always had as much time as I've wanted to get out and plant things and do things. But that doesn't mean that I haven't spent plenty of time planning and thinking about my garden and reading various books in relation to that. So I was lately given a couple of gardening related books and I had some very different experiences with them, and that motivated me to do a bit of a review. I'm tentatively linking this to Framed in September, which is a read along that is hosted by Elisabeth at Books and Books, Hannah at Hannah's Books, Heather at Heather Greg, Lindy at Lindy's Magpie Reads, and Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads. So Framed in September is a read along all about reading a book related to art, or any book, non-fiction or fiction, that's got kind of a theme related to art, and the hosts actively encourage us to be as broad with our interpretation of art as we wish to be. And my argument is that a beautiful, well-maintained garden is definitely a work of art, and even a slightly messy, aesthetically displeasing, dilapidated garden like mine, it's still an exercise of creativity every time you go out there, every time you're choosing what to plant and when and where. It's all about sort of colour and structure and choosing between sort of form and function. So I think there's definitely an artistic element to gardening on any level. So let's get on to the books then. So the first book to review is this one. So it's an RHS book and it's called How to Grow Plants for Free, and it is by Simon Ackroyd. This came out in 2023. So this was a gift from a fellow gardening friend who said it had been passed around, all of her gardening family members, and everyone had really enjoyed it, so she thought that I would enjoy it as well. And I definitely did. This was definitely a recommended one for me. So what did I like about it? I found that it was very specific and focused. So this is a book all about all of the different ways that we can make new plants. So basically propagation, the subject of propagation in all its forms. So this goes from everything from sort of dividing bulbs and tubers to cuttings to seed saving and starting new plants from seeds that you've collected yourself, rather than just going out and buying plants in pots and packets of seeds and so on. So despite having that really specific focus, it still manages to cover a really broad range. So there's a section devoted specifically to houseplants, but it also goes up to sort of grafting fruit trees and so on. So you can see the breadth of subject that you can cover just in the topic of propagation. I definitely never thought that I would be as interested in propagation as I was. I read this really quite attentively and definitely enjoyed it. It's got a very broad appeal, I would say. So it probably wouldn't be your first ever gardening book or your first ever introduction to gardening, but it is accessible to beginners, and it's quite clear in each section which techniques are beginner friendly and which ones are maybe for a more advanced gardener. I'm not a total newbie to gardening, and I found that there was quite a lot in here that I would think, oh yeah, I could use that, and things that people sort of reference all the time. The more gardening you do, you always hear people talking about, dividing your dahlias or whatever. I've only just got a dahlia for the first time this year, so now I can look in this and find out actually, step by step how to do that, which is really, really handy. The general layout is very clear and quite attractive. I should show you some pages. So there's sort of explanations and diagrams presented in a way that's readable, but also quite appealing on the eye, and sort of different sections like that. And so you can see kind of step by step the kind of the ways that you would go about doing things. And then at the end of each sort of general section, you then have some specific plant recommendations. So for instance, this very morning, I was talking to somebody about taking cuttings from rosemary, and I thought, maybe I'll take a cutting from my rosemary plant to give to them because they want a rosemary plant. And I went and I found the page on rosemaries, and I found out that actually if I want to take a cutting from rosemary for them, I should wait until the spring, because it probably will do better. I could try it now, but it will probably be better if I do it in the spring. So instantly you can very quickly access the information that you need on sort of a big variety. So yeah, that's pretty much everything. I would say this is a really good gift for a gardener, whatever level they might be at. Obviously a really experienced gardener probably knows everything they need to know about dividing their dahlias and taking their softwood cuttings and whatever, but anyone who's like interested and engaged with gardening but not a total dab hand will probably find something enjoyable to this from this, and also just potentially just find it quite enjoyable to look at. It's just a nice looking book, and there's things like a helpful kind of glossary at the back, and yeah, just more lovely diagrams to help you to sort of understand the different parts of a flower that you might be looking for. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this one. The next book was also a present, and that is Rebel Gardening by Alessandro Vitale. And this is he's a gardening YouTuber, so his YouTube channel is called Spicy Moustache, and that's how I found out about him and his book. And this one also came out in 2023, and since it first came out I've really wanted to get hold of it. I definitely am guilty of judging this book by its cover. I thought the cover looked really fun, and if you just kind of glance inside, you can see it's laid out in quite a dynamic way, and there's loads of kind of entertaining photographs, and when I flicked through it in bookshops I thought, oh yeah, that looks great. So eventually I did ask for it for a birthday present, and oh my goodness, I was so disappointed. This is definitely my biggest book disappointment of the year, and I'm really gutted that somebody bought it for me and I asked for them to buy it for me, because it was such a letdown. I mean, I probably would have got it at some stage because I was so interested, and I thought it looked so good, but yeah, I was really let down by this book. It's possible that my expectations were just a bit too high, but yeah, it wasn't great. So why wasn't it great? This is kind of my motivation for making this video, because I just really wanted to let out some feelings as to why I was disappointed with this. So it's completely disorganised in terms of structure, and even within each page the organisation isn't great. There's no kind of rhyme or reason to where things are in the book. So for instance, you get part 1 is called Defining Your Space, and in part 1 you get a few pages called, under the subheading, What to Grow. What to grow in your space. But part 2 is specifically called What to Plant, but in that section you get things about like how to make compost. Logically, how to make compost you would think would go in part 3, which is maintaining your garden, but no, but you have to get all the way. If you were a beginner, you'd have to read all the way to part 3, which is, you know, there's only 3 main parts in the book and then a section on different plants at the end. You'd have to read all the way to part 3 to find out what your suggested tools are for maintaining your garden. So yeah, it's not very well laid out. And you could say, well, maybe that's an editing issue. Maybe it is an editing issue, but there were just a lot of cumulative problems here, and a lot of repetition, really. It's really hard for me to work out who this book is for, because it says it's a beginner's handbook, but a lot of the techniques that are proposed are massively overcomplicated for beginners. They're things that I look at and I think, that's a bit of a big commitment for me, you know, 6 years into having my own garden, and somebody who's tried a lot of different things and, you know, willing and open to trying a wider variety as well. They're kind of like full-time gardener level of commitment, but not explained in a way that's useful to a full-time gardener. It also says it's for urban gardeners, and yet it contains instructions on how to grow an entire orchard, which again doesn't really fit with the beginner-friendly thing, because I think, you know, if you're a complete beginner, the first thing definitely not your first thing to do is to grow an entire orchard. I would say as an intermediate / advanced novice gardener, don't know exactly what to put myself as, I'm definitely not super experienced. I really didn't learn a lot from this. I thought there would be new things that I would pick up, but I just didn't really get very much. I learned a lot of buzzwords, and as I was reading, you know, the introduction, I was thinking, oh, this sounds really interesting. Okay, oh, this is going to be great to find out how this works, how I can practically apply it in my garden. And then I would read that section, and by the end of it, I'd be none the wiser. And it felt as though these words were just being put out there because they sound good, without the kind of the clarification and the backup. I would say this kind of like dynamic and vivacious style is completely okay and completely appropriate for a YouTube video. That's fine. That's what I expect from a YouTube video. I don't expect somebody to present a video with a full set of references and a full kind of scientific basis. In a published book, my expectations are different, and I expect to see evidence of the research. I expect to see more than just assertion. I expect to see kind of like a little bit of a backup to what's being said, and sort of clarity in what I can expect the purpose of this to be. Like, it just seemed like everything, it's just like, this will make your plants better, without really like making me understand how, or this will make the microbiology of your soil better, which is like, yeah, that sounds great. It really does sound great. And I know that soil microbiology is really, really important. But I was just left with a lot of doubts as to how each thing kind of worked in practice. And there's loads of sections where you've got like kind of supposedly step-by-step instructions. I'm trying to find a page with, I can't find one now. But the instructions are very wordy, and when you actually read through them, this is some more simple instruction pages, but when you actually read through them, you're left thinking, hang on, if I'm drilling that thing to that thing, but I've not got a good measurement there, like there's not the right level of detail for you to be able to carry out the instructions, I don't think. And a lot of the time he'll say, oh, just watch my video. If the instructions aren't clear, just watch my video, which isn't really what I'd kind of hoped for, having, you know, bought the book. There's also some kind of internal inconsistencies in it, which I found a bit funny. Like there's one part where he's talking about making leaf mold, and he talks about a really easy way to do it with plastic bags, and then he says, but I don't recommend this because it uses plastic bags, and then recommends like a very complicated multi-step process to build a container out of pallets that, you know, in an urban gardener you probably don't have the space for, urban garden, sorry. And yet, like, that's okay if one of your central principles is you're having a plastic-free garden, and if that's consistent throughout of like, we're not going to use plastic in this garden, we're going to avoid microplastics getting into the soil or whatever, then that's fair enough. Like, you've got a principle that you're sticking to. But almost every other section is all about, get some old plastic bottles, cut up some old plastic bottles, and like there's so much use of plastic everywhere else, and you can easily get hold of old plastic bags. Like, you can very easily recycle a plastic bag to put your leaf mold in, so it didn't make any sense. And other times he's like very happy to tell you to use cling film over the tops of your plant pots and stuff. It was just so inconsistent. That one stood out for me because it was going from something very, very simple and beginner friendly to something that requires DIY skills and a lot of like bits of equipment that you would have to either buy or source. It just seems like if you're aiming at beginners, that's not going to work. So yeah, my overall impression from this book, I will stop ranting now, is that there was kind of a lack of true content really, and a lack of well-grounded research evidenced in it. I'm sure he does know what he's talking about, but I just couldn't get it from the book, from somebody who just really wanted to write a book, publish a book, rather than it being like a really well thought out project. So having thought of all of those comments and criticisms, I really wanted to end on a slightly more positive note, with a book that actually does work and does tick all of those boxes. And this is my favourite gardening book that I own, that I've ever had, and that is Veg in One Bed by Huw Richards. And Huw Richards is also a YouTube gardener. I've followed his channel for quite a while, and got this book. This was also a present. This came out in 2019. So this is a true beginner's guide. It really works through a full year of vegetable gardening. You could start this with nothing but like a bare patch of earth and a windowsill, and enough money to just buy the seeds. And by the end of the year, you would have had a really good harvest. And that's what I had the year that I followed this religiously, strictly. Every month I did exactly what he told me to do. Was my first really successful year as a grower of vegetables and plants. And yeah, got a real sense of achievement from that. So I would say this works very, very well, for a complete novice, but also somebody who's maybe not a novice but wants to take their vegetable growing a little step further. I learned so much about like adequate spacing, succession planting and companion planting. It's all really clearly explained, and there's like a very good month by month structure. So this is, for instance, this page is in July, which encourages, and this is October, and there's little maps of what the the bed will look like at every point in the year. So you can quickly see, I just get to the page of December, you can quickly see, you know, what you're going to have in your vegetable bed and when. It really encourages you to maintain your plants well. So I'm definitely guilty of chucking some seeds in the ground and waiting to see, you know, coming back a month later and hoping there's something to harvest or look at multiple months later. This, by doing it month by month, it prompts you every time, you know, like this is what you need to be doing to make sure that your potatoes are going to have a good harvest at the end. So I really valued that when I was using it, and I still refer to this now to look for specific advice on varieties and specific kind of things to do in particular months. This book is definitely the opposite of Rebel Gardening, in that it just has that clarity and it has that accessibility to a beginner and a slightly more advanced gardener as well. So that was 3 gardening books, 2 new ones and 1 slightly older one, that I have been enjoying, released recently. And like I said, I'm linking this to Framed in September. I'm very much enjoying that, and I will be reading some more arty art books for that as well. And yeah, thank you very much for watching, and let me know if you've got any particular favourite gardening books, if you're a gardener yourself. If not, I don't know, if not, I don't really know why you've watched to the end. But yes, but thank you anyway. And yeah, take care. Bye.